talk about, tonight I'm going off-road a little bit from our regular Bible study because, like I said, tomorrow is the vigil of All Saints' Day. And this Thursday is the Feast of All Saints. It's a holy day of obligation. You need to attend Mass either tomorrow evening or on Thursday. So just to be aware of that for everyone. It is what we call a holy day of obligation. Now, what I want to focus on is that it has kind of a bittersweet kind of, in the history of the church, let's put it this way, it has a bittersweet kind of significance. And before I get to that, I'm gonna prelude this. I think I told this joke before, but I'm gonna tell it again for anyone who may not have heard it. I don't normally tell jokes, but this one is relevant to this. There was this man. He was an atheist, and he was in Italy, and he was going from Florence to Rome. And he was on one of these trains that was a long train trip from Florence to Rome. And so he got one of these compartments, and it's one of these compartments that, you know, you open the door and you sit, and they're like this. There's two people here and two people here, you know, in one of these trains. And he got in, and right across from him, as the train was leaving Florence, he saw these two men come in and join him in his compartment, and they were priests. But what was unusual is that they were both dressed differently. It was very clear that they were different, but that they were both priests. And, you know, being an atheist, he's like, oh Lord, I don't want to deal with this. You know? And so he kind of just, you know, held his head down, and it's like, but it was a long trip, and it's like, well, we're going to be in here for a long time. Might as well, you know, strike up a conversation just, you know, to pass the time. And so he said, good evening, and they said, good evening, and he goes, you men are priests, right? And they go, yes, that's right. And he goes, why are you differently dressed? And the one said, well, I'm a Dominican. And the other one said, I'm a Jesuit. You know, being an atheist, that didn't mean anything to him, you know. So he's like, well, what's the difference? And the Dominican said, well, our order was founded by St. Dominic in the 12th century, and it was primarily formed to fight the Albigensian heresy. All right. And he goes, well, I'm a Jesuit, and we were founded by St. Ignatius of Loyola in the 16th century as a way to fight the Protestants. You know, to counter the Protestants. So he looked at him and he goes, so which is better? And they both looked at each other, and the Dominican said, well, you don't see any Albigensians, do you? What? You don't see any Albigensians, do you?
What is Albigensians?
Exactly the point! You've heard of Protestants, haven't you? Yeah. There are no Albigensians anymore, are there? No. It was an ancient heresy in the Middle Ages. And part of the work of St. Dominic was to counter that from spreading.
All right.
Yay, all right. The purpose of the joke is to say that what you may not know about the Feast of All Saints is that that is traditionally the date in which the Protestant Reformation began. 501 years ago today, or tomorrow. 501 years ago today, tomorrow. Protestant Reformation began with Martin Luther posting on the Wittenberg church door, as the story goes, his famous 95 Theses. You know who Martin Luther is, right? He's the man credited for starting what is known as the Protestant Reformation, and this began October 31st, 1517. So over 500 years ago.
What's the date, October 31st? What?
1517. And that's the traditional date, and Protestants to this day, Reformed Protestants, mark the day as the turning point in the life of the church. It certainly was a pivotal moment in history, but to understand Martin Luther and why he did what he did, and what were the 95 Theses, which, by the way, the whole nailing on the church door is pretty much a pious legend. The scholars understand today, when they look at history, what most likely happened is that he sent these theses to the bishops of the area as a means of opening up a debate or discussion, because they were all written, if I'm not mistaken, in Latin originally, if I'm not mistaken. And the reason for that is that that was the language of the church. So he intended to speak to the church leaders about his theses. What are these theses? These are just statements. You know, like when you write in English class a thesis, it's just a statement. And he wrote 95 of these as a means of challenging, if you will, or questioning some of the practices that he was seeing. And he wanted to cause a debate. He purposely did this to cause a debate within the church. It was never his intention to break from the church, but he definitely wanted to stir up something in order to cause a discussion and a debate and some changes to occur. Well, what I wanted to show tonight is, it's an old movie made in the 50s about the life of Martin Luther. Probably one of the better ones I've seen. That gives you, and the reason why I like it is that the way that the actor portrays him is fairly accurate from what I understand of his life, in that you see what a tormented soul he was. Meaning, he starts out wanting to be a lawyer. His father and mother were actually quite wealthy. He went to law school. And in the process of going to law school, he had a religious conversion. He thought going into law was not for him. He decided to go into the seminary, actually the monastery. He became an Augustinian monk. And why Augustinian? Because in his mind they were the most austere, meaning that they had severe penances on the body. And he was noted for self-flagellation. He would whip himself. He would wear out his confessors with confession of his sins. He had this deep sense of how sinful he was and how holy God was and how could he possibly redeem me. And in the process of being in the monastery, his superiors would send him on pilgrimages, and he eventually was ordered to study theology in order to seek out the answers that he was looking for. And it was in that process that he discovered, or so he thought, the answer to his soul's torment, that the righteous are justified by faith alone. And I like the honesty in which this movie portrays it, and I'm hoping we'll be able to get to it, so I'm going to stop talking long enough so that we can get to it. I don't know if we can finish it. We will certainly get to a good portion of it, where he physically writes in the Bible the word only, because it's not there. And modern translations understand this. But it was through his studies in the book of Romans, that's what came with his epiphany. Yes?
How did that coordinate with Henry VIII? Because he broke away from the church and became a Protestant. So those dates, how did...
Fairly close together. Fairly close.
So Martin Luther did his breakaway first.
Yes.
And then Henry VIII
yes.
embraced that.
But for different reasons. Martin was for theological reasons primarily, and for social change. He was very much offended by the worldliness of the clergy the opulence of the papacy and the egregious sin, he thought, of selling of indulgences. That was really the straw that broke his back. That's what really got it going. The theological parts came later, but it was those things. And why am I bringing this up? Because I keep mentioning that the crisis that we're going through now in the church is very much like what it was at that time. I wouldn't say it's exactly the same. I wouldn't say that. But I see similarities in the spread and the extent of this kind of clerical corruption and so forth, and how it affects the laity. And I see it as very similar to that. And interestingly enough, I was reading something, I believe it was in Catholic Answers, that also equivocated the crisis in the 16th century with what we're going through now.